My name is Layla Sterling, and I'm 29 years old. It was 9:42 a.m. on a humid Saturday in June. The air in the bridal suite was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive champagne. My bridesmaids were laughing, but their laughter felt hollow, like glass breaking in another room. I remember looking at my engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that felt like a lead weight. Then the door clicked open. My stepmother, Evelyn, walked in. She didn't look at my dress. She didn't look at my face. She handed me a manila envelope. "Your father wanted you to have this before the ceremony," she said, her voice as cold as a winter morning. I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to become a ghost story. The paper was rough, almost abrasive against my fingertips. I pulled out the results. A DNA profile, 2 sets of numbers that didn't align, 0% probability of paternity. The man who had raised me, the man who was supposed to give me away in less than an hour, was a stranger by blood. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine, starting at my ankles and settling in my chest. My hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled. 10:15 a.m. came and went. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a heavy, rhythmic thud. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat slowing down. The smell of the roses suddenly turned cloying, like rot. I didn't cancel the walk. I wanted to see their faces. I walked into the chapel, the train of my dress whispering against the stone floor. There were 185 guests. When I reached the altar, I didn't look at my fiancé, Julian. I looked at my father, or the man I called father. I held up the paper. He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. My sister, Maya, leaned in from the front row. "Did you really think you were one of us, Layla? You were just a placeholder until the trust fund matured." I looked at Julian. He looked at the floor. No one stood up for me. The silence in that church was a physical wall, cold and impenetrable. I stood there for 9 minutes, realizing I was standing in a room full of enemies. I walked out of that church and didn't stop until my feet bled. I ended up in a small, dusty park near the harbor. I sat on a bench, a bride with no groom and no family. An elderly man, Mr. Holloway, was sitting on the opposite end feeding the birds. He was 72, wearing a worn but impeccably clean tweed coat. I had met him 3 years ago at the local library when I helped him reach a book on the top shelf and spent an hour discussing classic literature with him. He looked at me, then at my tattered veil. He didn't ask for an explanation. He reached into his pocket and handed me a clean ironed handkerchief. "The most beautiful gardens are often built on ruins, Layla," he said softly. "Don't mourn the house that was built on a lie. Start digging for the stone that is true." Mr. Holloway wasn't just a library regular. He was a retired maritime lawyer who had spent decades quietly acquiring distressed shipping assets. He saw something in me that day, a resilience that my family had tried to crush. He took me to his small office, a room that smelled of sea salt and old ink. He didn't give me money. He gave me a key to a small, neglected warehouse by the docks and a stack of legal ledgers. "Manage this," he said. "The world thinks the shipping industry is for the loud and the greedy. Prove them wrong with precision." And that's when I understood that my real path wasn't through an inheritance, but through the hard, honest work of building something from nothing. I had exactly $6,150 in a private account my grandmother had started for me. It was my only weapon. My family had already revoked my access to the Sterling estate accounts. They did it 15 minutes after I walked out of the church. I stared at the key Mr. Holloway gave me. I made a decision so quietly it scared me. I would not post a viral video. I would not call a lawyer to fight for a father's love that didn't exist. I would simply become a ghost to them and a titan to the world. I would let my absence be the only thing they had left of me. For 7 years, I lived by the numbers. $6,150 was stretched, invested, and turned into $60,000, then $600,000. I stayed in that warehouse, learning every bolt and every crane. I grew the business from 1 warehouse to 11 shipping hubs across the coast. I lived a quiet life. I didn't buy a mansion. I bought more assets. I only found out later through industry news that my father had gambled the Sterling name on a failed real estate venture. They were bleeding out, and they didn't even know I was the one who had bought their primary debt through a holding company. They thought I was a failure, a girl who disappeared in a white dress. I was the one holding their leash. The confrontation happened on a rainy Thursday. My sister, Maya, and Julian, who she had married shortly after my disappearance, walked into my corporate headquarters. They didn't know I owned the building. They were there to beg the CEO for a loan extension. When the secretary opened the door and they saw me sitting behind the desk, Maya's face turned the color of ash. They didn't apologize for the DNA test or the mockery. "Layla, thank God," Julian said, his voice dripping with false relief. "We've had some bad luck. $275,000 would clear the immediate debt. We're family, after all." They stayed for 18 minutes, explaining why it was my duty to save the Sterling name. I looked at them across the vast expanse of my desk. I thought about the 11 nights I spent sleeping on a cot in a cold warehouse. I thought about the 6 years they spent mocking my name at dinner parties. I opened my ledger and looked at the number 6,150, the amount they thought was my total worth. I pulled out the foreclosure notice for their family home, which my company now owned. "I am Layla Sterling," I said, my voice steady and low, "but I am not a Sterling of your making. You told me I didn't belong in your church. You were right. I belong in the world you are currently losing." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Here's the part that still haunts me, the look of pure terror on Maya's face when she realized I wasn't going to help. I handed them the notice and pointed to the door. I watched them walk out into the rain, their expensive coats soaked and useless. I felt a profound sense of stillness. Success isn't about the noise you make or the revenge you take. It's about the person you become while everyone is waiting for you to fail. I am Layla Sterling. I am a master of the tides and the owner of my own soul. This is for anyone who called for help and heard silence. You are not forgotten. You are simply being built into someone who no longer needs their noise.